Hey, my name is Duane, 47 now, and I would say my drug of choice when I was in the world was really alcohol. It controlled everything I did, connected with me partying and hanging out with just all the wrong crowds, and it was something that literally drove me into some areas where it almost cost me my life. I remember driving on I-95, trying to make it home from a long night early in the morning, and I missed the exit completely, and I almost ended up in the embankment. And I remember hearing my hubcaps, and I ended up getting on the exit eventually, but I realized at that point something had to change. So I really hated it after a while. It was something that I knew wasn't good for me, but you know how it is, you kind of keep going back to it, and it's just something that kept pulling me back in until one day, as I looked at it destroying areas of my life, my new wife, and my wife was pregnant. I walked into a church one day and I heard the gospel. I heard this different news from a man who was preaching something simple. It was a message of love, and I ran up and I received Jesus Christ. And although my life wasn't perfect, it was something that I knew was better than what I was doing. So at that point, something changed, and I just felt like God was doing something in my heart. And I would say even after receiving Jesus, it wasn't like a switch flipped in my life. It was me kind of going back and forth trying to figure out, what does this new life mean to walk with God. And I remember in and out of church, still kind of slipping back in some of the alcohol, and I remember coming across a verse in Galatians 2:20 where it says, "I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." And I began to personalize that verse. There was a time when I began to read that verse and I started looking at it more like Jesus died for me. And I inserted my name in that verse, and it changed my life after that point. And I put it this way. I said, "Duane has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer Duane who lives, but Christ lives in Duane. And the life which Duane now lives in the flesh, Duane lives by faith in the Son of God who loved Duane and gave himself for Duane." And when you look at the cross and what Jesus did, crucifixion was the most gruesome death known at that time. And Jesus was willing to take that for me. And so after that point, I began to look at ways that Jesus wanted to crucify things that was destroying my life. And I would ask God, like, I want to be crucified. Like, you took my sin, I want you to take my sin away. Those things, God, I want you to start with alcohol. I want you to start with those things that continue to pull me down, because at that point, personally, I was destroying my life. And so I began to allow Christ to really work in that area. And then at some point, I didn't want the alcohol anymore. The taste was no longer appealing. I didn't walk through the store and wanting to grab a 6-pack or a bottle of vodka, a bottle of rum, whatever those things were. Those things used to consume me. I didn't want those things anymore. So personally, I started feeling this freedom from alcohol. Also, I was married, and at that point in our marriage life, we were going to get divorced because my wife would not put up with me continuing to party. And at this point, we had a son. He was 3 months old. And honestly, I was setting such a poor example. I knew I needed to change. And so my wife would kind of watch me. She didn't believe me. And I would still sort of stress her out in many areas. But my marriage began to change. So not only personally, I saw the Spirit of God working in me, bringing personal joy, but it began to bring joy in our marriage. We started to laugh again. My wife started to trust me again. My family started to grow. And I realized at that point that the more that I followed Jesus, the more that I didn't do the things that were destroying my life, it didn't destroy my home. And we continued to have kids, and we had a family. We ended up having another son. We had a daughter, and life in terms of the Roberts household just began to change completely. Family vacations were different. The home was different. When I came back from work, it was just different, because previous to that, it seemed like I was walking into a war zone with my wife, and now I could see the joy in her heart. And at that point, she did not receive Christ, but later on, probably a year and a half to 2 years later, she received Jesus in her own heart. So now we were raising the family together. The other thing that I would say also is that I started seeing my kids praying. I started seeing my kids have an interest in Jesus. I started seeing our kids have an interest in worship and faith, and what does that mean? So we were going to church together. And then also after that, I saw even God do something in my own heart in terms of purpose and calling. I had gotten a degree in electrical engineering, and it was great. I was making good money. I was really supporting my family well. But I felt probably around 10 years after I received Christ that God had a different calling on my life, and I began teaching the Word of God. I began to lead other kids. I began leading singles and doing different things. And 6 years ago, I gave it all up to become a pastor. Now, I didn't go to seminary. I had a 4-year college degree from Florida Atlantic University, but I had no degree in pastoring. But what I found was the more and more God began to work in my life, the more and more I felt the joy in this other calling and purpose that I never had before. And I would say, honestly, I've not looked back. This was 6 years ago. I don't regret this decision. It is one of the hardest things to do. But the joy is I get to lead others in the same journey that I was in 20 years ago in 1999 when Jesus called me. Now I get to be the man that God is using after he's crucified so many things in my heart to also lead others to him. And that's the greatest joy. So Jesus inside means the joy that you feel, but it's also this joy that you feel as you walk this world. This world is very hard. And it's hard to feel joy, but the joy is not superficial. It's not fake. When you give up those things and you allow Jesus to crucify your flesh and the things that destroy your life, he brings this level of joy that comes from the inside. And so why is it such a great decision to allow Jesus in your life? Like, why would you want this God who came and died for you? Why would you want him in your heart? And I would just say this: he changes everything. It's not easy. Our reality and our struggle is very, very real, but he loves you through the struggle. He's not coming for perfect people. He's coming for imperfect people, because at the end of the day, none of us are perfect, whether it's a person that chooses alcohol or another drug or steals money from a bank. None of us are perfect. We all have sinned, as God's word says, and falling short of the glory of God. We can never measure up. That's why he came down to reach us where we are at. And the verse that comes to mind when I look at what Christ does for us is in Revelation 3:20 and 21. This is the New Living Translation. It says, "Look, I stand at the door and knock. And if you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. Those who are victorious will sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat with my Father on his throne." When Jesus came to suffer and die, he died a gruesome death, but in 3 days, there's this resurrection that happens and he goes back to sit with the Father. But when he's talking about here that he stands at the door and knock, it's just like somebody coming to your house for dinner. They knock on the door, they don't push the door open, they don't kick the door down. They open the door because you're about to share a meal together. And what Jesus is saying is that is the door of our hearts. He's knocking on your door but he's a gentleman. He's not going to kick the door down. He's not going to force you to follow him. But if you open the door of your heart to him, all he says, I just want to come have a meal with you. I just want to be your friend. And just think about a best friend in your life. It's somebody you trust. It's somebody you hang out with to watch a football game. It's somebody that you trust. And it is also somebody that hangs with you through the tough times. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's like, I want to just hang out with you. I want to come in your heart, and I simply want to be your friend. But this is just not a friend that just comes into your life and then leaves after a while. He wants to be your friend forever in heaven. And here's where the victory comes. When you allow Jesus as your friend to come in your life, he gives you victory over sin, the struggles that you have, the thing that like you want to get rid of. But he also gives you victory over death, because at some point in time, we will all die. We will all close our eyes to this side of earth. And there's another life that Jesus wants to promise. And he wants you to transition from this life to the next forever and ever in heaven. And later in the book of Revelation, it says there's going to be no more sin, no more death, no more disease, no more crying. But that victory is won here. And Jesus wants you to be in heaven with the Father, sitting on a throne, ruling as kings. Not that we're prideful kings, but we're humble kings, realizing that Jesus, who is king, has come down to simply be with us, to take us back to heaven with God. He's the way, he's the truth, he's the life. That's why you ask him to come, and he changes your life forever. And I pray that this encourages you, even in your own heart now, to think about just God, and you can invite him inside. Just, God, please forgive me. I know I'm not perfect. I know I struggle, but I believe that you came to die for me, my sin. You were crucified for me, and I want to hand my life over to you so you can lead me, not only here on earth, but to lead me to heaven, into that life forever with you. So I pray this message blesses you. God bless you.